you hear about this thing over and over again, which is like product market fit, which is makes complete sense, and it's a very real thing, and it's a very critical thing for any business to hit, right? I think what gets undervalued in healthcare innovation, and specifically to your question around physicians starting companies in the healthcare space, is product market fit is important, but founder market fit might even be more important.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leadership Rounds, a podcast shining a spotlight on exceptional clinician executives thriving and driving innovation at the intersection of business and healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Reena Pandey, and together we'll explore the wisdom and insights of great healthcare executives and craft a prescription for leadership success, one candid conversation at a time.
Gentlemen, it is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I will just start by saying that. It's not often that I get two people. It's not often that I get two psychiatrists. It's not often I get two brothers. So this is a unique one. But I think you guys know that I have made it my current career's mission to support clinician executives and to highlight clinician executives and to really spotlight what exceptional looks like as clinician leaders, physician leaders in particular here. And you guys are just two wonderful examples of what great clinician executives can be right now. Arpan and Amit Parikh, co-founders of a new company called Kin, both psychiatrists, both entrepreneurs, both physicians. I'm thrilled to have you joining me on the podcast.
Thank you. I think it's a really important mission that you've devoted this piece of your career to. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for having us here. We're excited for this conversation.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. So maybe we just go back to that intro, because I find it so fun that you're both brothers. You both chose medicine. You both ended up in psychiatry. You both ended up moving into entrepreneurial roles as chief medical officers of different early stage companies, and now shifting from chief medical officer to founder of your own company, and now working together. So, I mean, tell me the history, either one of you or both of you. Would love to hear the story and how you got from point A to point B.
Yeah, I can kick it off, and then we can feel free to add as layers on. So, yeah, I think, if you rewind all the way back, and as you know, psychiatrists like to tell stories and listen to stories. There's obviously, some family DNA in thread. So our dad is actually a psychiatrist. So you could say we kind of grew up in this world, right around this world. And at least for me, seeing the fulfillment, the joy, the excitement that career brought to him was formative in me thinking about what I wanted to do when I grew up. So, I made that decision pretty early on, and like most or any good, South Asian son, only applied to combined BS MD programs straight out of high school. I made that commitment, and also got myself out of taking the MCAT, which was not bad. And ultimately, though, decided after going through med school and going through third and fourth year that psychiatry was a place I wanted to be. So, maybe it was fate. I like to think I had some free will or choice in it, but I guess we'll never know the real answer to that. And ultimately, I think if you would have told me back then when I master's in residency, for example, that, hey, in 6, 7, 8 years from now, you're not going to be practicing medicine full time, and your day job is going to look like what it's looked like today or for the last, 6 or 7 years now, I probably would have not believed you and would have asked if you're in touch with reality. So I think like most careers, it's been a really unpredictable and serendipitous journey, but a really, really fulfilling one. And here we are.
Yeah. And then, it was similar on my end, obviously, from the same family. I saw what Arpan was doing and what my dad did, and also applied to a lot of these BS78 programs, and also did one myself, did a 6-year, did 2 years of undergrad and then went straight to med school. Retrospectively, best decision. It was a great experience and just felt like it was just the right thing for me to do. all through med school, I thought I was going to be a surgeon. I was like, I'm going to become an orthopedic surgeon. I spent all of my time doing that, thinking about that. I loved my psychiatry vocation, and obviously there's a lot of, family DNA there. And then I finally spent, I don't know, like 6 weeks or 8 weeks doing it dedicatedly. And I realized that I enjoyed the clinic more than the OR. And I was like, I don't think I've ever heard a surgeon that I've worked with say that. So like, maybe being a surgeon isn't for me. And so I chose psychiatry, which then was retrospectively, again, the best decision. Like, this is absolutely what I love. I love practicing clinically as a psychiatrist. And what's funny is when I started psychiatry residency, if you asked me, what do you want to do with your career? I would have told you something like, I could see myself doing a lot of parts of psychiatry. The part that I will probably not do is child and adolescent psychiatrist. And guess what I ended up doing? I became a child and adolescent psychiatrist. So like, I think what my journey has told me is like, whatever I think is going to happen is probably not going to happen. And I will find my way to the thing that makes the most sense for me, which was doing a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship. And then through that, finding my way into, helping grow behavioral health businesses over the past years now, which has been super fun.
I actually am embarrassed that I don't know which one of you is older and which one of you is younger. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe we shouldn't even share that.
We're pretty close. Arpan is a few years older than me.
So what's it been like for you guys sort of traveling in the same journey, related journeys together alongside one another a couple of years apart?
Yeah, it's been fun. I think so. With the age gap that we have of like 3/4 years, we were always kind of like one life step apart, right? Like when I was in high school, Amit was in middle school. When I was in college, Amit was in high school. When I was in med school, he was in college. When I was in residency, right? So we were always like just like one step apart. Now, which was interesting, but also it's like you can most relate to someone who's probably like doing the exact same thing you're doing in the same phase of life, right? So I think what's been most interesting and most fun in the journey is like more recently, right? Where we both entered the same phase of like not just being practicing attendings, but being practicing attendings who were running healthcare businesses. And that started happening, I would say, 5-ish years ago, right? And then that also overlapped with us living in the same city for the first time as adults, which had never happened before. So I think when we moved to LA about 5 years ago for the first stint in LA, and then he made the shift out of clinical practice. And now we were both chief medical officers of growing scale and digital health companies. Like the fun just like exponentially increased. And it very, very nicely laid the groundwork for this, what felt like the no-brainer decision of like, we have to start a business together as like the next step. And then again, the timing was a serendipity, right? When Amit moved back to LA after a New York stint, and it just like became perfect to do Kin.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to get to Kin in a minute and to like how the paths really now have converged completely, right? I'm working at the same organization, building the same organization together. But I think there are probably a lot of listeners who would love to hear the initial, so there have been 2 big leaps for you guys, right? Like the academia or well, the clinical care to entrepreneurship, and now furthering entrepreneurship, but shifting roles really, right, from chief medical officers to founders and running your own company that you're building from the ground up. Maybe we can focus on the first position, because I think a lot of people who listen to this are at that phase and are thinking about like, what does it mean to jump and become entrepreneurs? Maybe you can both share your journeys to entrepreneurship and how that came to be, and what was it that drew you to the opportunities that you jumped into?
Yeah, I think we're going to kick us off because I think like my story like is slightly different than Arpan's, but was very informed by Arpan's story. So like, as we mentioned, our dad was a psychiatrist. He owned his own private practice for a long time, right? For 40 plus years, and finally shut it down. Not recently, and retired, which was like after, a long time of helping patients and after enough time. And we saw his entrepreneurial spirit through him being a practice owner. And we always saw that as a part of medicine. And so I think, I'll speak for both of us when I say this. I think we've always thought about, yes, we want to be physicians. Yes, we want to help people. But there's also this idea of being an entrepreneur in that domain. And so we always thought about like, how could we do that? And I think like, if you would have asked us both like a decade ago, we'd have been like, that's probably owning our own private practice one day or building a practice ourselves from the ground up, etc. I then went to, med school and residency. And then as I was graduating and in my later stages of training, I saw Arpan go to business school. And I was like, that's super interesting. And he'll tell you that story a little more. But I saw him do that and kind of find other parts of medicine that I really wasn't just exposed to, right? Like my brain was still like, I probably want to start my own practice one day. But then I got to see there's this whole other world which I started to get exposed through just being around him. And because I saw that, I started expanding my own horizon around like, wait, well, what are those other types of opportunities out there? And I was just practicing full-time clinically at the moment. And I was just like, well, there's all this interesting stuff happening. This was around also the time of like the pandemic when there was like a lot of re-emphasis on mental health. And I just saw all these really interesting ideas about how to increase access, especially in virtual ways for mental health care. And in talking with people that Arpan helped introduce me to, and just learning the community, I was then able to find that first foray into that and decided to make that pivot, kind of take a leap of faith, being like, you know what, like I can always go back to full-time clinical practice. It's something I enjoy. I still practice clinically today. I don't think I will ever stop practicing clinically, quite frankly. Something that I really enjoy. But I was like, I want to go try this thing because it seems like something that could be fun and exciting in a different type of way and push me in a different type of way than just being a full-time practicing physician. And so I did it. And it was like a lot of the story, it was like 100% the right move retrospectively. Like I really enjoyed being able to help build a company and like learn about like how the business works and how do you treat patients and how do you create a clinical team and philosophy that is grounded in reality and truth and evidence. And so like, it was just this like serendipitous way that I kind of like found my way into it. And then once I was lucky that, that first company took a bet on me and like helped build me into who I am today, to like let me kind of like grow into those types of roles, which has been super fun. But yeah, so a lot of learnings that I was able to gain without doing the full business school track because I had Arpan sitting next to me. But I'll give you the other, I think, end of that.
I love that. Just to reflect on a few points that you made, so my parents are both physicians too. My dad was an ear, nose, and throat surgeon, and my mom's an anesthesiologist. And he also like had a solo practice. I mean, he ran a small business, right? Like he had real estate. He had a team of like 4 staff. He had capital expenditures, like all of it, right? And I didn't really appreciate it back then, but now looking back, you can see that so many physicians, there's so much bias, right, against like thinking that physicians can't think like business people or whatever the tropes are. But historically, all physicians are business people. Like everybody ran their own little small business. My mom actually is an anesthesiologist. She and her partners started a small billing practice because they realized that they were outsourcing billing for their group, and they were like, "Well, we could do this better, and have better accounts receivable, and maybe we can use it sell it to other practices and help them with their billing practices." And so she was like one of my first models too as an entrepreneur. So just interesting to think back about how these folks, we think of them as doctors, but entrepreneurs many, many times. So I love your family story. Arpan, how about you? It sounds like you took a little different, slightly different path or added pieces to your puzzle.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I would co-sign everything Amit said. And I think the foundations were like exactly the same, right? As far as like early exposure, thinking about this, being interested in it, but never having like the place to actually experiment with it. So where my story took a twist, it actually starts as an attending, right? So as I was finishing residency, during residency, I'd taken a specific interest in addictions, addiction psychiatry. I'd spent a lot of time moonlighting and, working on the inpatient detox and rehab unit. So as I was figuring out what I want to do with my life as an attending, I went to my PD, Dr. Singh, who's still a really good friend and mentor to me. And he said, "Hey, we have this opening at the addictions clinic. There's an integrated ambulatory clinic at Mount Sinai that did IRP and PHP and outpatient rehab. And we had a brownstone. We actually had a beautiful 20 something bed brownstone on the Upper West Side, and we would house patients there for 9 months in Manhattan. And he was like, we need someone to run this, and I could do it. And I thought that would be really cool and fun. So I did it, which in hindsight is kind of crazy that he gave me that job as a first year attending. Because I had never done anything in my career until that point besides diagnose and treat psychiatric disease, right? I'd never managed a team. I'd never been responsible for a P&L. I had never had to think about growing a service line or a business. And yet he gave me that opportunity. And what that opportunity opened my eyes to was similar to what Amit said, which is like, there's this whole other side of healthcare, right? And like, as physicians, like we are all, you, me, Amit, we're all world experts in diagnosing and treating disease in like very small specialties that we're world experts in. And I realized that that's only like 1% of the story. And as physicians, like we actually don't really get exposed to or become smart about the other 98% of like, how does a patient actually experience the system? Or how do physicians engage in this system? Or who are the other stakeholders that even participate in the healthcare journey? And that got the wheels turning. And I started to realize that there's this whole other piece of healthcare medicine that is pretty interesting to me. And what would it be like to explore that more? So again, serendipity, my fiance at the time, so my wife, was applying to business school. It was always part of her, career plans as a investment banker and then, private equity gal. And I was going to quit my job as an attending and get a job as an attending wherever she got into school. Like this was the plan, basically like through her entire application process. And then I had accompanied her around a couple of her interviews at business schools, like up and down the East Coast. And while she was interviewing, I would like hang out in the admissions office and just like read all this stuff they had laying out. And I realized like some of the schools she was applying to had really interesting like healthcare tracks or healthcare majors or healthcare programs. And I got curious and interested. And long story short, I made a very late and impulsive decision to apply to a couple of business schools, only one she got into, with the idea that if I got into the place she decides to go, then I would do it and we could do it together. And that would probably be really fun. And I ended up riding her coattails into Wharton, which ended up being just an incredible experience, right? So we spent 2 years in Philly, and that was a moment of like, wow, like there's so much in healthcare, and there's so little I actually know about it, which I know it sounds heretical to say this as a double board certified physician, but like it's a hot take that I don't think physicians actually know that much about the healthcare system. Again, we're world-class experts in diagnosing and treating disease in our specialty, and like that's the limit of our expertise.
Yeah,
So
totally.
that was my
Completely.
opportunity that accelerated my ability to get out of full-time clinical practice. And I learned about this new thing I'd never heard of before called value-based care. I literally had never heard those three words in combination in my life up until then. And that got me connected to, Care More and Such and Jane. And that kicked off this cool journey, post-business school journey, post-detecting journey, whatever you want to call it, of spending more time actually building companies that are changing the way healthcare is delivered. Now, and to Amit's point, though, never giving up seeing patients. So I saw patients all throughout business school, back in Mount Sinai in New York, and like being a head of private practice in LA since I came to the West Coast like 7 years ago. And that's something I don't think I'll ever get wrong. It's too fun.
I love it. Yeah. Amazing. Hey, so let's jump to Kim, actually, like hearing your stories. And then I want to dig in a little bit on the entrepreneur to entrepreneur, transition, right, to founder, went from chief medical officer. But maybe this is really a good moment for you guys to just share what Kin is and what the origin of the company was and what you guys do and how it came to be.
Sure. Maybe I'll kick off with just like very simply what Kin is and the origin story from my perspective, and then we can take it from there, right? So very simply, Kin is a patient-facing app that aims to help patients better understand, organize, remember, and share the information that comes out of their appointments. And then we'll get to the origin story, which will explain, the why behind it. But just the macro vision we have for kin is, we have a strong belief that there has not been nearly enough investment in innovating for patients and their loved ones over the last 2 decades. The three of us have been incredible beneficiaries of the investment that's happened in digital health and healthcare the last 20 years. Because most of that has focused on the system and the doctor and the healthcare professional. And in our vision with kin is, we want to make patients and caregivers who oftentimes get forgotten, but are probably the most important stakeholder in healthcare, the beneficiaries in the very same way all of us have been on the delivery side. So that's just the very quick high level vibe. We can get into more detail of what that actually means. The origin story from my lens is, as I was building my last company, Soul Mental Health, which is a multi-site, multi-specialty, in-network, brick-and-mortar behavioral health business, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with breast cancer. So this is now about three and a half years ago. And she's doing very well, in full remission now. But my wife and I and her siblings and all the families became the quarterbacks of care for her mom. And even though there are quite literally 13 physicians in the immediate family, like not joking, it's 13. And we're all relatively well-resourced and pretty smart and well-connected. It was still challenging to get her to a successful outcome. We did it in the end, but it took way more effort in bootstrapping solutions and blood, sweat, and tears than it should have ever. So what have been bothering me the last couple of years post that is, if we barely pull this off, the average American is just screwed before the game starts in trying to navigate a complicated chronic care journey. So with that pinging around my head last summer, and I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing at the time, I had that thought, I guess the cliche light bulb moment that some entrepreneurs talk about, like, why isn't there an ambient scribe for patients? Like, that would have been so beneficial in this care navigation journey. And my first thought was, it must exist. Let me go find it so we can use it and the therapy can get, up to speed on it, et cetera, et cetera. And I called a meet, like, I think within a few hours I had this thought. And we were like, there actually is nothing that exists that does this today. And when people bootstrap it, like people take voice memos or, they take notes in a Google Doc and then they feed it into Claude or ChatGPT, but like there's no simple, elegant, magical, and well-capitalized with a legitimate team behind it ambient scribe for patients. So that was really the moment where I think it became clear to both of us that this was something that had to exist in the world. And we wanted to be the ones who brought it into the world together.
I love that. I mean, we're at a really unique moment in healthcare with the AI craze, if you will, right? Was there something about the moment that also proved inspiring as you guys were thinking about launching this company?
I mean, definitely, right? I think, we had seen even within our own companies the value that the physician or the clinician facing ambient scribe had. And just like the adoption curve of that tool is probably the fastest adoption curve of any type of clinician-facing tool that I've ever seen, where people are finding so much value from it. And we were also seeing, in our own, in the clinician job, we were seeing this. And in the corporate world, we're seeing this rapid change of like, we were talking where it was like, I can't remember the last meeting I went to where somebody didn't have an ambient scribe running. And it's like, we're seeing this technology being used in all of these facets of life for, corporate executives, for clinicians, delivering care to patients. But where does it exist for the average American, for the person who's struggling with the healthcare system and trying to navigate it? And we're just like, well, it absolutely should, right? And because of all these other tailwinds, this idea of recording a conversation from our lens, it started to become normalized. I think if you'd have asked most people 3 years ago, how you feel about every conversation you have in a setting being recorded, most people probably would have vomited. They would have been like, absolutely not. That's crazy. But now it's just so normal that like no one even blinks when you're like, hey, I have my meeting scheduled. And they're like, okay, great. I have one too.
Totally. Everybody assumes now, right, that somebody's listening to the conversation and taking some notes.
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
just like the culture has changed so dramatically on recording, not only in business settings or social settings, but also in the medical room, right? Because the doctor, the clinician is also recording. And so just the sentiment has vastly shifted recently. Yeah.
How do you, I think a lot about where clinicians fit in the development of AI products and solutions, right? I think there are a lot of technical founders that are marching forward, building solutions for healthcare, maybe without deep understanding of healthcare, how it works, and the particular nuances. Personally, I think it's a really unique spot for clinician executives to be entering and really developing products and lending our expertise. So I'd love both of your take on the power of the clinician executive voice perspective in leading on AI innovation right now.
Yeah. I'll give my thoughts maybe from a high level perspective, and then Humpy literally owns and runs product, right? So he is a physician executive who's running product for an AI business, and I think he has very interesting perspective and opinion on that. So my lens is, as we were starting to think about building this company, and then how are we going to build it? What are we going to build it with? How are we going to fund it? Right? You hear about this thing over and over again, which is like product market fit, which makes complete sense, and it's a very real thing, and it's a very critical thing for any business to hit. Right? I think what gets undervalued in healthcare innovation, and specifically to your question around physicians starting companies in the healthcare space, is product market fit is important, but founder market fit might even be more important. Or it's not more important, it's higher leverage point, i.e. 10 points of founder market fit might be worth more to a business in the long run than 10 points of product market fit. And that's something I think I've thought a lot about, and we end up thinking a lot about as we are going through this process of starting Kin. But very plainly, what I mean is, like, yes, it's important for us to go out and survey users and survey patients and survey caregivers. And would you use an app that does this? And is this a pain point for you? And how do you solve this problem today? Right? All these ideas around like forgetting what your doctor tells you, which is all good and well. But you also have to remember the fact that the level of founder market fit for a physician who's starting a healthcare company is unparalleled. Like, between we've probably seen tens, if not hundreds of thousands of patients in our careers. And we don't need to survey people to prove to ourselves or anyone else that patients forget what we tell them when they meet the appointment. And that leads to frustration and tears and bad outcomes, right? So I've started to develop this very strong thesis around the idea that there's actually incredible power when the person building the business is someone who personally feels the pain or first can seize the pain. And it's not specific to physicians, right? This can carry to any business. But I think in the case of physicians who are building in healthcare, that is almost inherently some level of, and there can be an immense level of founder market fit.
I've never heard anyone actually use that phrase before, founder market fit. I'm going to tuck it away. I love that. I'll push you a little bit though, and would love your perspective, right? Because we certainly see individuals with N of one experiences who think that that's sufficient to change whatever it is they're looking to change. And oftentimes you need those brilliant, breakthrough entrepreneurs with ideas, even if it is an N of one. But sometimes that N of one isn't sufficient, right? And you need to surround yourself with people who've had tens of thousands of experiences, right? The flip is also sometimes an issue, a thing I think you guys and I are trying to break down, which is this perspective that like having had the experience is insufficient as a physician, right? I think we probably get a lot of like, yeah, but can you then run a business and build a product. And so I'd love to take on both ends of the spectrum. On the product one, obviously, I mean, this is exactly what you're doing. And I love that we have so many more clinician product leaders, technology leaders right now. I'd love your guys' take, because I do think like someone hearing what you just said, Arpan, may have either one of those two biases start to come out. So curious to how you guys would react.
Yeah, super quickly, and then we'll get back to this, right? So I do think founder market fit is a real thing, and it's from the perspective of like, should kin exist in the world or not? And I think like founder market fit actually dictates that maybe to a higher degree than like us surveying 200 patients, which is important, but like we've seen this 10,000 times. That's a separate question from who should build it once we've all agreed that it should exist. And I think that that's a whole different story, which we can talk more about. I think the fact that we had the careers that we had put us in a good position to do that. And I agree with you. I'm not sure that me 8 years ago would have been the right person to build this company, right? So I think there's a separate question of, okay, founder market fit helps us confirm that this is a need that the market has and a product that patients need. And then the question is, okay, now who are the people to actually bring it into existence?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, say more there, either of you, right? Like, what are the qualities and characteristics that you both brought that made you the right people to found a company and to shift from chief medical officer and to founder and CEO and chief product officer, right? What are those skills?
Yeah. So like one thing I would first like take a step back and talk about is like the title of chief medical officer is so ambiguous. It means like a million different things at every company. But just saying that title, when you have no idea what that person was actually responsible for. It
Totally
could be
agree.
from their
The
literally
problem with my
basically
day job today.
yeah, right. It could just be almost anything, which is a fun thing, I think, at the end of the day, because it gives physicians the ability to expand into all these different areas and domains where they spike or where they enjoy themselves or they feel like they bring real passion or value. And so like, I think over my career where I've like spent and I've enjoyed spending most of my time, and I've been lucky to be given the opportunity to like expand and grow into, is owning and being a part of building out the products that either our patients or the clinicians who are using, and being the real clinical voice in that decision-making process around why are we building these things? What are the things we should be built? How should we build them? Right. And so I've got to live that experience over the past, 5, 6, 7 years now. And that's been super fun, super exciting. And that's what I've found is like the area that I enjoyed a lot of. And we're starting, I think like a decade ago, the idea of like clinicians being really entrenched in product was like more antagonistic, right? It was almost like this thing where there's like, product have an idea, and then the clinician will come in the room and be like, nope. And then there'd be like a fight between them and et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing more and more product teams and clinicians realize like the only way for us to actually build things of meaning and value is like both teams working together. But that does take special people on both sides, because I think you have to have the product people who can understand and are willing to understand the clinical lens, but you also have to have clinicians who are willing to break out of I'm only a clinician and I only see things through one lens, to understand the product lens as well, right? And I think that's something that most people can build and grow and learn, but it does take the type of person who's willing and wants to build and grow and learn in that area.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've spoken about the same topic. I was the no person for so many years, and not because I thought of myself as old and stodgy and backward and non-innovative, but the process in our case wasn't set up right, because it wasn't set up the way you've set it up, which is to have clinicians and product people, and or in your case, the same human, but like to have that partnership from the very beginning, from strategizing, ideating, strategizing, actually building PRDs, building product, building, deploying, and then testing and iterating. That has to happen together at the outset.
And I think the superpower that clinicians who start working more in product have is, and this is, I think like, I think you kind of alluded to this, but like people build what is important to them or what makes sense to them. That's just natural, right? Like that is what you're going to do. And I think when you think about most product or even like an engineer who has an idea and starts building things, that sometimes the things that end up being built are built for someone whose mind works like an engineer or someone whose mind works like a product person. And the lens that I think clinicians can bring is like, we've been in thousands, tens of thousands of exam rooms where we know that's not how the average person, the average American actually consumes their healthcare. And even though it may make sense for the super users that a lot of us, even us here in this podcast are probably super users of our health, that is not the average person that we're treating on a day-to-day basis, And that's the thing that we're trying to solve here at Kin at the end of the day, right? Is like giving them the ability to understand, because like I think one of the gaps that we kept seeing was like, even when we had teams delivering the most technically proficient care, we go back, we're looking at quality and we're like, wow, like this is exactly what should have happened, but the outcome doesn't happen. And we're like, what? And it's because all the things, the visit is 30 minutes long, but the patient lives the rest of their life outside of the visit. And like, there's just such a gap. And like giving our patients more handouts, more complex graphs and numbers and all of these things, that doesn't help them. Like it just confuses and complicates the situation a lot of the times. And so like what I'm really focused on building here is like something that like my parents can use. An 85-year-old who doesn't use technology can click a button and use it without having to think about there is some AI system behind it. There's all these random settings and tools. No, it should just work. And so like that's what we're focused on. I think that idea is something that clinicians particularly bring in, that lens to product that I've seen a lot of.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a practical reality of how healthcare functions that we've experienced, right? And it's critical to bring. You want to break things, but you also need to break them within the context of the way the world and people function, right? So in you. Just a couple more questions about AI or thoughts about AI. I feel like I said, we're sort of in this special moment, and you guys have sort of taken a unique perspective on how to apply AI in important ways in healthcare by focusing on the patient. I've talked to folks who are focused on clinical decision-making pathways, folks who are doing it, but for the provider on the other side, right? Mary Presti at Microsoft, who came from Nuance, and but how do you see where what you guys are doing fits into the larger landscape? Or how, right now it's one thing, but how do you see it growing and connecting to the other parts of the healthcare ecosystem that are focused on AI today?
Yeah, I think, we see AI as this, stating the obvious, like transformational technology that is giving people and tools capabilities that were never possible before. Right. So the whole vision behind Kin, which I think was getting at for the set, is how do we bring this transformational technology to the average American? Right. So when we think about what Kin is and who we're building it for, it's like our target user is exactly who we just said, right? The target user for Kin is the 85-year-old who lives in small farm town in some state in the middle of the country, whether that's Iowa or Kentucky. And he calls his diabetes the sugar because he doesn't know what diabetes is. And he goes to his small primary care doctor's office on Main Street. And that doctor keeps his records on pen and paper like our dad did. So, his medical chart is in a manila folder in a filing cabinet. And he goes to the crappy LabCorp around the corner to get this lab done. And he's never heard of ChatGPT. Like, that is who needs AI. The three of us, we are the power users of AI, but like, we don't really need it, right? Like, we were doing just fine before we had ChatGPT and Claude and all the other tools, right? So our whole vision behind Kin is like, how do we bring this transformational technology into the pockets of the people who need it the most in navigating the most complicated, the most expensive, and the most morbid medical conditions? Because like, those are folks who are suffering the most in this country, and they're also the people whose diseases are costing this system the most for reasons that were probably preventable. So the way we see this fitting in, right, is like AI is the engine that sits underneath a magic consumer experience. And if we do our job well, then our users don't even see, hear, feel it happening. It just feels like magic to them. And we've been really intentional, right? There's a reason why we are one of the few venture-backed companies that doesn't have AI tech in its name, right? You have to be kind of crazy to like go build a venture-backed company and not call it Kin AI.
In .ai, yeah, exactly.
You go on our website and like it's not on the home. Like we are not trying to make that the front end sector. The front end sector is like this is a magic co-pilot that sits in your pocket and just helps you do the hardest things in your health journeys. And if we do that really well, that this will plug in, Rena, right, to all the other folks who are building in healthcare and building in AI. Because at the end of the day, like our vision for Kin is this becomes the central hub for that American's healthcare. Like the thing that he can reference on his terms in a language he understands whenever he wants to. And we see conversational AI as just the initial wedge into building that. And of course, like there will be so many opportunities for us to then add and layer in all these other really interesting data sources and metrics, many of which are powered by or insights that are gathered by AI to make that experience even more informative for our user.
Yeah. There's so much of what you said that so resonates. There's one piece I want to like reiterate, which is you clearly came from the perspective of what problem are we trying to solve and what technology can we use in order to solve it, versus so many folks who are saying, yeah, how can we use AI? Where can we put AI, right? You guys did a very patient first approach to figuring out what you wanted to build, right? Which is telling and really valuable insight. So
the one thing I would add there that's super important to us too is, we see a lot of really amazing people do amazing things in healthcare today, building companies. A lot of them position themselves as almost antagonistic to the traditional system. They're disrupting the traditional healthcare system as it exists today, which I think there's value in. Don't get me wrong. But from what we know is the vast majority of Americans still use the traditional system. And when you get really sick, you still use the traditional system most of the time. When you need your oncology care and you need a surgical oncologist, you need radiation therapy, you're typically ending up in a big academic system or a big hospital system. Still, you still have to use those traditional rails. And we are specifically positioning Kin as being a tool that lives alongside the system as it exists. It doesn't need to disrupt the system. It's something that anyone can use in all of these places. And it only helps those systems because patients who remember things better are better patients. They stay healthier and the treatments work better. So it's in everyone's best interest.
I love that. I think you're spot on. Well, we're coming close to the end of our time together. What gives you optimism about the future? There's so many people are worried about this, that, and the other, but maybe we'll start on a positive note. What are you optimistic about in the healthcare system going forward?
I think one thing I'm optimistic about is just the future of physician leaders and physician entrepreneurs. So I've been very lucky to have incredible teachers and mentors throughout my clinical training and career, as has Amit. And what's been important to us is now to give back and to pay it forward. So, we teach here in LA at USC and at UCLA. And I can tell you the things that psychiatry residents, because that's what we know, are thinking about today and the questions they ask us and the way they think about their careers and futures is like light years ahead of the way I was thinking about my career when I was in their seats a decade ago. So that brings me a lot of excitement and optimism, because if that holds true, and this next generation of physician leaders is going to do something super special.
Amit, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think what gives me optimism or what I'm optimistic about is that there's so many, there's so much new technology that we're seeing, and that pace of acceleration and adoption is wild. And I think there's so much room for us to grow as a medical field in using these, and we have to use them the right way, and we have to figure out the right tools and the infrastructure and the frameworks, etc. But I think there's just like no other time in history have I thought that there's a more exciting time to be in healthcare.
Yeah, that wonderful last words. To the two of you, Arpan and Amit Parikh, co-founders of Kin, and Kin yourselves as brothers. Just such a pleasure to have you on a podcast and just hear the voices of exceptional healthcare leaders and physician executives. So thank you both for joining.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Leadership Rounds, where clinician executives share wisdom and insights on what it means to be an exceptional leader in healthcare. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, comment, and share with your friends and fellow leaders in healthcare. Join us next time for another dose of leadership wisdom. Until then, I'm Dr. Reena Pandey. Thanks for listening.